Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's talk on the power of choice and patient experience improvement and the critical role for the integrative health professions. My name is Jennifer Oliovnik, and I'm the Program Manager for the Project for Integrative Health in the Triple Aim for the Center of Optimal Integration. Today's webinar is the second in our series, a short course on understanding the emerging triple aim landscape, and I would like to take a moment to introduce our speaker, Jason Wolf. Jason is a recognized expert on patient experience improvement, organizational effectiveness, and sustaining high performance in healthcare. As president of the Burrell Institute, Jason has led growth of the organization and becoming the leading global community of practice and thought leader on improving the patient experience. Jason is also the founding editor of the Patient Experience Journal, the first open access peer-reviewed journal committed to research and practice in patient experience improvement. Prior to joining the Institute, Jason designed and led the organization change, service, and leadership development strategies for the Eastern Group of HCA, supporting over 45 facilities, and conducted groundbreaking research in identifying the characteristics of high-performance healthcare organizations. Jason is a sought-after speaker and an author on numerous articles and publications, including 2 recent books on organization culture, change, and performance in healthcare. He also serves as a professorial lecturer at American University's School of Public Health Affairs in Washington, D.C. We're absolutely thrilled that he is with us here today. Welcome, Jason, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Really an honor to spend some time with you today as well.
Well, before we begin, I would like to just offer a primer about our sponsoring organization, the Academic Consortium for Complementary and Alternative Healthcare. For those of you not familiar with ACAC, we are a broad multidisciplinary organization, and we advocate for 5 core professions, each with a programmatic accreditation body recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. And the 5 core professions are acupuncture, chiropractic, massage, direct entry, midwifery, and naturopathic medicine. Through our member organizations, we are linked to 375,000 healthcare providers and about 180 accredited institutions and programs. We are also affiliated with traditional world medicine fields and holistic and integrative medicine organizations. Related to ACAC, the Center for Optimal Integration is a priority project of ACAC to facilitate advancement of interprofessional collaborative healthcare. The center offers a web-based platform that serves as a virtual gathering place for anyone with a stake in integrative health care and medicine. Additionally, the center houses 2 main projects, the PEARL, that's the Project to Enhance Research Literacy, and PIHTA, which I'll describe in a moment. But before I do, I just wanted to give some recognition to our generous sponsors who make this work possible, the CHP Group, Visual Outcomes, and the Leo S. Guffman Foundation. And so PIHTA simply refers to the acronym, the Project for Integrative Health and the Triple Aim. And the PIHTA initiative seeks to understand the overlap between the values of integrative health, so using least invasive methods first, partnering with others, promoting self-care, and creating health, with that intersection of the goals of the Triple Aim, so things like reducing costs, enhancing the patient experience, and improving population health. So one of PIHTA's goals is to continuously build out the most useful base of published research, high-quality grade literature, and examples from the field to support engagement and implementation decisions. Other goals are to assist participants and decision makers in the optimal use of values, disciplines, and practices of integrative health and medicine and meeting the goals of the Triple Aim. Additionally, we like to feature experts in this area to build on an interprofessional and multi-stakeholder community. And with our emphasis on the Triple Aim, patient experience is at the heart of our work, which brings us back to Jason and today's topic. So I'm going to pass the controls over to Jason. Jason, do you have them?
I think I do. Yep, I think I do. Sorry about that. We're great. Well, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from today. And I really appreciate the chance to be with you all, honored by the invitation to spend some time with what I believe is a true critical part of the care continuum as we look at the opportunity to really impact the lives of patients, families, and communities that we serve. And as we talk about this topic today, I want to start with this premise of choice, what was in our title. And as we have our conversation today and look at this discussion around the power of choice, and then setting our context of what we want to achieve in terms of understanding the patient experience, where I see the critical play that integrative health has in this effort, and then looking at some key strategies and levers that help drive us to provide the best experience overall, that we sort of poke at this conversation a little bit. And obviously it will sort of unveil a bit of my bias in this work as well. And a lot of it does come back down to this very simple but I think powerful word of choice. And I think as we look at healthcare today, more so each and every day, healthcare is becoming a conversation of choice. What people choose to do in terms of their care, we see it more and more play out, obviously, with even healthcare reform, but also how we choose to engage with our patients and families that we serve each and every day. So there is great power and choice in how we address patient experience, how we address one another in the care setting, and how we integrate all the components of care across the continuum, which is fundamental, I think, to the work that we do. So I want to start with a brief story, and see if I can get that to change for you. Sorry, Jennifer, it's not switching for me. I apologize.
If you like, you can pass the controls back to me. I'm happy to forward the slides for you.
Great. So if we go to the, yeah, I'm not sure if you see them now, but if we go to the next slide, and as we are doing that, I want to tell you a brief story. It was actually just a few years ago, not even a few years ago, just a year or two ago now, where I was on a stage talking to the Global Patient Experience Conference. We were closing it down, and like a good husband, my wife was 38 weeks pregnant, and I was in another city. And the call comes, you need to come home, and after spending all of this time talking about the experiences of patients and families at our global event, arrived back in Washington, D.C., where my wife was, made it in time to grab her, jump in the car, and off we went to the emergency department. And it was a Friday night in Washington, D.C., so you can imagine it was a relatively calm environment to go to any emergency department on a Friday night, let alone in the District of Columbia. And we walked in. I believe I left the car on, running, and everything was sort of moving in each sort of way. We walked in the emergency room, and my wife was very calm, doing her breathing. They put a band on her, and the admissions woman looks up at me. She says, "Son, is everything okay?" She said, "Just take a breath." She said, "Just take a breath with me." She said, "Everything's going to be okay." And she looked at me straight in the eye, put her hand on my shoulder, and said, your family needs you now, so just breathe with me. Just breathe with me. Everything's going to be okay, my boy. And before I knew it now, she's like, "Well, let me push you upstairs." And she's pushing my wife in the chair, and she's got her hand on my shoulder, just sort of keeping in contact with me as a human being to another human being, saying and reminding me to breathe and saying, "Everything's going to be okay, my boy. Everything's going to be okay." Next thing I remember is like, why is this woman taking care of me? My wife is the patient. Here I am breathing, but I'm feeling better about it. And all of a sudden she breaks out singing, "Everything's going to be okay, my boy. Everything's going to be okay." Now, she got us up to the labor and delivery room, and obviously everything worked out wonderfully. But what was incredible to me was here is a woman that nowhere, I think, in any healthcare manual does it say to put your hand on a patient or family member's shoulder and sing to them, or to help them breathe through a situation, or in any scenario like that in which they are trying to address their situation. She made a choice in that moment. She made a choice in that moment to truly provide the best experience, and I would say that's the patient experience, because it did encompass the view and the perspective of the patient and family member. And so as we think about that story, I want to use that to set our context overall. So as we go to the next slide, I'll be talking about setting our context and defining patient experience as we begin to explore the issues of integrative health overall. And the first topic that I would like to talk about, I'm not sure if the slides are moving for you either, Jennifer. I apologize. And we'll go one more. I'd like to talk to you all about a concept called the performance paradox. And the performance paradox is really grounded on a set of 6 terms. These terms, simple, clear, understandable, easy, trouble-free, and painless, which you'll see on the next slide here, are synonymous with one another. And as we look at these words and we think about the construct of experience and the construct of the work that we do in healthcare overall, a lot of the things that are fundamental to what we do are truly simple, clear, and understandable. But the reality is, if we just click here, that we'll see that they're not always easy, trouble-free, and painless. And the performance paradox sort of plays out an interesting issue with us in particular. The fact that as much as we know there are certain things that are good and true, that they're not always easy, trouble-free, and painless. We know in healthcare that wellness is always something that's good for us, but it's not something that people always do. We know that these opportunities to care for ourselves and others are things that are simple, easy, and understandable, but they're not always that easy to do. And so one of the opportunities and challenges I think we have as we think about patient experience is also overcoming the clear, simple, and understandable, but then building the muscles to move forward into that which is not necessarily always easy, trouble-free, and painless. And in building that construct, what we've done at the Barrel Institute is work on a definition of patient experience. We pulled together a number of individuals from truly around the world to contribute some key concepts and constructs. And as we have worked over the last few years in developing these core concepts, what we find at the heart of patient experience are these key elements. That it is the sum of all interactions, every touch point, every interaction between individuals in a care setting and outside of a care setting. That it's shaped by the culture of that organization, and that it ultimately happens across the continuum of care. But at the end of the day, it is about the perception of patients, family members, residents, if they happen to be in long-term care. So as we think about the power of both interaction and then the influence of culture in our ability to develop that, we see that there's huge opportunities because that provides us a number of levers from the way that we engage with human beings to human beings, and also the way in which we develop who we are and want to be as an organization overall. So as we look at the construct of the definition a little bit further, I want to share with you a little bit of research that we've done on it. The concepts that I want to share really in the top boxes, and there's a lot more beneath in a reference to the full article, where we looked at a pretty significant view of literature around how people are addressing the patient experience overall and how they're defining it in various organizations and settings. What we found is that the core concepts of interactions, of culture, of the power of perception and the continuum of care really at any touch point across the continuum was central. But woven into this was truly the integrated nature of care. So for us, that's the inclusion of quality, safety, and service. I think that's the inclusion of multiple ways in which we can deliver care. It's the fact that patients and families are partners in their care, not recipients of it. And so as we begin to look at that perspective, that becomes a critical element as well. And last, it is about putting the person at the center of the conversation about their needs, their desires, understanding the specific questions or qualms that they have, and then really ultimately being able to address that based on some of the key principles of person-centeredness, such as dignity and respect, a strong listening, and those things that are critical as well. And what was really fascinating to me is as I looked at sort of the definitional themes of patient experiences, and I was talking with folks in preparing for this webinar and thinking about the great work that happens in integrative care, I began to see a significant overlap. So if we look at the integrative medicine definition on the next slide, we'll see actually that some of these same themes play out as well. And those themes are around the importance of the relationship. They're about focusing on the whole person, that they're informed by evidence, that they use all therapeutic approaches, and it is ultimately to achieve optimal health and healing. And what's fascinating to me is that I began to think about, well, where does patient experience and integrative health overlap? It is in fact that I believe as a field of practice, as in the work that you all do in your various disciplines within integrative health, have been thinking about this, whether explicitly defining it as patient and family experience or not, for a long, long time essential to your work. And so in some ways, I think there's a lot that the rest of healthcare can learn from these critical pieces. The importance of relationship, the idea of whole person, the fact that it is about all approaches and professions and disciplines. Now, it is about creating health, not necessarily fixing or diagnosing issues that people have. And I think that that fundamental nature does come back down to some of the things that Jennifer was sharing before. If we look at the integrative health values of treating the whole person, supporting self-care, which to me is that construct of partnership, using the least invasive first, finding the right methodologies that help people become healthy as soon as they can, but in ways that are least invasive. And the idea and construct of partnership being so key that at the end of the day, we're ultimately in the process of creating health. To me, that is, in many ways, what we've discovered and have seen and have worked towards from our efforts at the Barrel Institute to drive the patient experience conversation. And so it brings up an interesting wrinkle for us, because we look even at the construct of the project, the PIHTA in particular, which is, I think, an incredible effort overall, and kudos to the work that's been done and is continuing to be done in this effort, is aligning those values, the integrative health values, with which I believe are very similar to the construct of focusing on patient experience overall, to then moving on to what the elements of the triple aim are. So as we look at enhancing patient experience, if we look at reducing costs, if we look at improving the health of the populations, and I would say there was actually an article that recently came out around should there be a quadruple aim, which is about taking care of those that provide care as well. We have an interesting overlap, and as I have seen experience play out, I have seen experience sort of show up in space, and I've talked to a lot of patients and families, probably the same ones that you all work with every day. The reality is they don't distinguish between costs. That is part of their experience. When they see the ability for integrated efforts across continuum care, or like we like to call it population health, that's now being played out in ACO models, patient-centered medical homes, that's not something they distinguish. See, all of these elements, even though we look at them as distinct in the triple aim, are truly the experience of patients and families. And so when we begin to broaden that conversation, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, we have to realize that every opportunity we have in healthcare really is about impacting the experience and ultimately creating health for the patients and families that we serve. You know, at the end of the day, and I think this is so fundamental to what I've seen and experienced in my conversations with folks in the integrative health space, is that we are simply human beings caring for human beings. No matter what our methodology, no matter what our process or protocol, we are really one human being addressing and caring for the needs of another human being. And that's why this aspect of choice becomes so fundamental, because at that point, when it's just you with another individual, a patient, a family member, a peer, we have to make choices in that moment. And it's how we choose to engage, how we choose to interact, that makes all the difference in the experience for both individuals in that equation. And I think that's fundamental. So as we think about the integration of these ideas and the construct of linkage of patient experience and integrative health, it's fascinating to me because I had a chance just recently to visit Health Center, Carolinas Health, down in Charlotte, in their new cancer center there. I was so impressed to see, as I think many of you are probably seeing now, the true value that they place on the integrative health component of the experience that they put in place for their patients and family members. So in the new cancer center, you can literally come up to, I believe it's the 3rd floor in the cancer center, and if you go left, it's where you can get your dialysis, and they have a beautiful center where people can sit by windows and do all the things that they need to do. But if you go right, it's their integrative health center. And so you have that path towards getting your meds, or to the right is the path where they actually, the minute you walk down the hallway, you begin to get the sense of lavender. You begin to hear the music, and there is the room for where potential for acupuncture is, and there is a room for massage therapy, and all of the things that also help people in the healing process. And I think what they've been able to define, and I think what that exemplifies so well, is that the experience encompasses all these things, and we realize that each of us has a role to play. That's fundamental. So what I'd like to say is we need to look a bit beyond even the triple aim to the broader construct of experience overall. So if we look at the key elements of the triple aim, as we mentioned, the health of populations, the patient experience of care, and the per capita cost of health care, what I'd like to say is that all is ultimately, at the broadest sense, the construct of experience. I think the patient experience of care as a terminology really, as I've seen it play out in the triple aim, is about that clinical bedside experience, especially when you look at safe, effective, patient-centered, timely, efficient, equitable. But there's a broader conversation that's happening with people in healthcare today, and I think you all have probably experienced this, that in fact we can say that there is truly a market shift. And we're moving from a volume-based system to a value-based system. I think something that's probably been really true to the nature of integrative health over time is that we're moving to one that is about relationship-based versus episodic, that is about thinking about building loyal, lasting, and integrated plans for people. But this market shift is pretty fundamental. And it has us balancing ourselves in some interesting ways, because do we believe that the volume-based system of care, in particular in the United States, is going to shift fundamentally in the short term? No. But the reality is that the idea of value is truly coming into play. So we have to play this balancing act as we move from one to another, because we are living in a dynamic marketplace. I call it the alphabet soup of healthcare today, where we hear more and more of these words: experience, value-based purchasing, CAPS, meaningful use, core measures, readmissions, activation, ACA, and the list goes on and on and on. But when we get to the bottom of it, it really is, as I talked about, that moment of choice between one individual and another in the healthcare setting. So I want to share with you a story about another conversation on the power of choice at play. And it was interesting. I was, as you can imagine, and I'm sure you all experience this as well, if you're traveling somewhere and someone asks you what you do, and you begin to speak with them. I had the chance, I was sitting next to a gentleman on a plane, he asked me what I did, and I said I have the honor of helping build an organization that's committed to improving the patient experience in healthcare organizations around the world. And he said, well, do I have a story for you, which I hear a lot of. And he said, let me tell you about my 80-year-old mom, who lives up in New Jersey, and she's having, she's scheduled for hip replacement and surgery, and she was going in for her pre-op appointment. So she went into the waiting room for this physician practice, and as she went to the registration desk, as so many of us do, she actually had a question about her appointment and something she wanted to ask the receptionist as she was getting registered. So she went up to the desk, and the receptionist on the phone, and she just made her, held her finger up and said, just have one question, really quietly. And the woman, the receptionist on the phone, just kind of looked up at this patient, and then pointed to the desk in front of her, and just tapped her finger on the desk and pointed down. And the woman just said, I understand, I just have one question. I don't want to interrupt you. And she just tapped at the desk again, pointing her finger down. And then the third time, she just said, it's okay, I understand, I'll wait. The receptionist put her hand, the phone set to her shoulder, and looked up at the patient, this gentleman's mother, and said, ma'am, can you not read the sign? It says, please sign in and sit down. We'll be with you shortly. And that was her first encounter. Now, we've probably had that happen in healthcare on a number of occasions, but what do you think this woman did? For whatever reason on this day, she had enough. Now, mind you, this was a patient who had been going to this hospital, to this physician practice, to this medical office building for her entire life. She had all her surgeries there. Her children were born there. She had all her care in this one organization. And from this one experience, she said, this has been enough for me. So she left that setting. She left the office, and as she told her son, as he told me, she did this thing called the Google. And on the Google, she started looking up her surgery. She tried to understand what was critical to the work that she was doing. And what she found was another surgery center. She clicked on the link. They started chatting with her online. They sent her some emails with information. They called her up and followed up, and they treated her with incredible dignity and respect. The long and short of it is, what do you think this woman decided to do? She actually chose to get her surgery at this place instead of where she's been going her entire life. And now this wasn't a clinical encounter. It had nothing to do with anything that you might think is typical of healthcare. But yet, here was an experience that one person made a choice at a moment of contact with the patient or family member that changed, obviously, the nature of care for this individual, and lost them, honestly, some business as well. This woman decided to go get her surgery somewhere else, and you know where she ended up going? From New Jersey to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. She found a great center with great safety outcomes. They treated her with dignity and respect, and she chose to take a flight to another city to get her care because of what she encountered. And so the implication of experience is broader than just the outcomes. It has significant ripple effects as we think about healthcare overall. So as we think about what that means, there's three levers that I want to talk about briefly, and then as we move into thinking about what strategies we can consider in the work that we do. The first is that we are moving beyond patients to consumers in today's healthcare world. I don't think anyone will argue with that. The power of choice is rearing its head in this conversation. And it's not to say that people are not patients, but they are choosing. And I can see in particular in integrative health where this becomes even more significant, whereas their path is not necessarily as dictated by payers, insurance companies, and other things, referrals. The power of choice becomes powerful. It becomes important because they are really deciding to engage with people based on the experience they have, and part of that experience clearly being the outcomes that they receive. So when we looked at some data, we were finding this, that people talk about the reputation of skill and quality of care and the criteria in selecting hospitals, but making decisions in healthcare overall, these are trends that we see consistent over and over again, that people are using data, people are using information to make choices. Consumers are deciding what to do based on the information and access that they have to information today in ways that they never have before. And in fact, there are really four, I think, consumer-focused revolutions. I think it's an interesting commentary done on Fast Company not too long ago that says, insurance companies are now designing products for the consumers rather than the employers, that they were finding access to healthcare outside of traditional channels. If anyone has seen CVS commercials in the last few weeks, let alone months, where they now introduced CVS Health, for instance, where their whole model has changed to become a primary care center and a giver of health, a creator of health, in essence. The model is going to change for how people engage in healthcare, that folks are looking for the right fit rather than necessarily the best solution. So the relationships that you build with your patients and families are going to be fundamental. And I think that's what's so fascinating to me as we look at those core values of integrative health, is that you understand this, and it's been part of the work that you've been doing for a long time. It's now, how do we elevate that conversation to truly bring the experience of care to the forefront in terms of the conversation? And as I mentioned, technology, the access to information, is really changing the way that people think about care overall. So first and foremost, patients are becoming more and more consumer-focused each and every day. There are also, I think, healthcare is moving beyond outcomes to the bottom line, and I think as we're thinking about that, it becomes critical because that is our lifeblood and the ability to maintain healthy and effective healthcare organizations. And I want to give you an example I thought was interesting. It is about readmissions. And I think if we look into a lot of the data now, I don't have time to talk about all the research, but I think even, Jennifer, you have some great information on the Center for Optimal Health site as well around how the right kind of care can impact readmissions, the fact that we create health and create lasting health for people as well. But what they found in this specific study was that experience measures, the fact that people were treated with dignity and respect, that they rated the hospital well, that they understood that there was responsiveness and skill, that they would give those organizations high ratings, were more predictive of whether someone would be readmitted to an organization, to a hospital, than if they scored well on the core quality measures. See, core quality measures are simple checklists for people to check off, but it doesn't have anything to do with the relationship or the engagement of that patient or family member. And what they found is when you had an engaged and aware and a patient with a family member with positive experience, you were actually reducing readmissions. You were creating health and creating lasting quality as well. And there's broader, I think, more significant financial implications, especially as you think about your work in health systems. As scores and gaps increase, you begin to have a ripple effect. It's not simply the reimbursement equations that are now out there for many organizations, but it truly is now being impacted by the way insurance companies and other organizations are reimbursing people. It is being impacted, as we talked about, by the choices of patients to go elsewhere, about the fact that employees are leaving organizations that do not perform well in experience, and ultimately that funding overall is diminished. I've yet to see someone in a philanthropic position tell me, Jason, we, as a board, we're very proud that our experience scores are so low, and we know we're going to be able to raise a lot of money as a result of that. You see donations and funding for organizations to sustain their work being dictated by their performance in this as well. So this is a financial issue and a significant one for organizations to consider. We have to be cognizant of that as well. And lastly, I'd like to say we're really moving beyond centeredness to this concept of experience overall. And what's powerful for me is that as we begin to look at the broader framing of this, which we will hear in a second, it is more than just putting the patient at the center. There's a lot of patient-centered practices out there. And let me give you an example that was just recently in the Journal of the American Medical Association. If you look at this picture, what do you see? As I look at it, it's a beautiful picture, a patient, a young lady sent to her physician's practice. And we opened the picture and looked at it for a second. He was thrilled that she would take the time to do this, but then he looked at it again. And he was petrified. He was horrified by what he saw. And in writing this article, he said, look at this picture. There's the patient who's actually doing okay. She brought her mom, who's sitting there next to her, her sister, who's holding her baby sister. They're in the exam room to support her. And where am I doing my quote-unquote patient-centric work of entering data into the electronic health record so that I can ensure everything's captured? Me with my back to the patient. And he said this was an eye-opening opportunity that through the patient's eyes, is this truly an experience we want to provide our patients? While it might be from a systemic or a process standpoint patient-centric, how do we move to an experience mindset? Which does lead us back to the definition that I shared earlier. If we look at this concept of experience overall, I want to bring you to the point of definition. See, experience isn't something that's nice. This is not service quality. This is not, we smiled and greeted you and we were all happy all the time. It is about the totality of the encounter that we provide. And what happens in experiences, it's the things that are perceived, the things that are understood, and most importantly, those things that are remembered. I believe if I asked you all now, we're sitting in the same room, how many of you have an experience from a healthcare encounter that you remember so vividly, be it positive or negatively? I think we'd all raise our hand. We carry them with us. These are not stories that go away at the end of a clinical encounter, the end of a healthcare journey. They live with us. And so experience is something that is lasting and remembered, and we have to think about it in that way. And it's because of that that I surely see experience as a macro construct, and why I think the elements and the values of integrative health have in essence nailed the key concepts that are so critical to a positive experience. It is about quality. It is about safety. It is about service. It is about cost, like we talked about. It is about health outcomes. So for me, there's the triple aim in some ways wrapped up in this concept of experience. But it's also about engagement. It's about how we activate our patients. It's about focus on centeredness, and it's about pulling all these pieces together. But if we think about it from the perspective of those patients and families that we serve, or for that matter ourselves, and when we've been that patient or family member, all we have is an experience. And most people aren't privy to the knowledge of healthcare that most of us that probably operate in this world day to day are. And so we have to help them understand that we're looking at this from the broadest and most possible, widest window. Because it's interesting, if we think about what drives people's choices, I've had people over and over and over again say, well, Jason, we're not retail, we're not hospitality, we're not any of these things in healthcare, and I would agree. In fact, a recent study by PwC, you'll see, showed that more likely than not in any other industry, healthcare, personal experience and peer recommendations make a difference. 42% to the next highest 24% in the hotel business. So there is no doubt to me that personal experience and peer recommendations matter. I think we could all agree, and those recommendations come from the experience that we provide to our patients and families, to the way that we treat them, to the outcomes that we generate overall. So I want to share with you briefly some strategic keys that we see consistently showing up across the continuum. As we've had an opportunity to work in systems and healthcare practices in long-term care facilities, there are really some interesting and dynamic common themes that evolve. Beyond the tactics that I think we all know would be central to driving good experience, these are sort of what I like to call universal keys that help us begin to think about how we create positive outcomes at all points of the continuum of care and across all disciplines of care. And the first one is really this concept of definition. Interestingly enough, as I looked at data, we run an annual benchmarking study that continues to expand, and we found that 50% of all healthcare organizations in the United States today still do not have a formal definition for experience, for the patient experience, and for what they're trying to accomplish in that experience. So it basically means you have a 50-50 chance, say, if you're driving down the interstate near your house, and you see that blue H, for instance, and you're going to that hospital, you have a 50-50 chance of actually finding a place that when you walk in the door, they can tell you what it is, the experience that they want you to have. Now, here in this example, I happen to walk into a hospital. I go on monthly visits to a few organizations a month. And on the wall of the lobby of this hospital, there was this sign. Sitting in front of the sign was a woman and her daughter. The woman's holding her daughter's hand, and she's saying, I just want you to know what Grandma's going through. And they had brought this, her grandmother and this girl's grandmother in yesterday to the hospital. And you could tell the girl was nervous. She's kind of fidgeting in her feet. She's looking back at the main door thinking, can I get out of here now? And the mom was able to actually walk her through what was happening for the grandmother, what that journey, that experience journey was going to be for her grandmother and this organization. From planning to the warm welcome they had when they arrived yesterday, her mom said, to the fact that they made us feel so safe and helped us understand our way around, to that they've helped us understand the itinerary that we're going to have with Grandma while she's here. They work with us to build trust, that they're staying in touch with us. They let us know this was a good time to come visit because the doctors were going to be there and that we have an opportunity to talk with them with Grandma. And we know that based on this, they're going to give us a fond farewell. And their commitment to that organization is to create lasting personal connections. That this is about creating lasting health. And so this was nice. I said, oh, it's nice to sign in the lobby. That makes sense for people. I think most organizations build through their definitions or their strategies around these things that they put in a binder in their office drawer. But I was fascinated as I left the lobby that it was also there in the cafeteria. And there it was in the third floor mother baby unit, and there it was outside the emergency department waiting room, and it was in the executive lounge, and even in the physician lounge, that they shared their definition. And it was clear to me that it wasn't just for that mom and that daughter, who after hearing this you could tell was much more calm, but it was for the organization to remember why they were doing this as well. So first and foremost, I believe without a target, without a definition, you have no basis for action. So what is your definition for the experience you want to provide in your various care settings? We have to think about definition, getting clarity, alignment, input from all the voices that we touch and engage in the work that we do. What are those key elements that you want everyone to share? And then you have to commit to creating one. I love the story, we probably heard it over and over again, of the gentleman in NASA who fundamentally was asked, he was a janitor, asked by the president, what's your job? And where someone said, my job is to sweep the floor, he said, I'm actually here to put a man on the moon. And we need to be able to walk into our healthcare organizations, regardless of what part of the continuum or what setting we're in, and have folks know what their commitment and role is in driving the best experience for patients and families. So the next one is around leadership, and I believe leadership is essential. We're literally just speaking to a number of folks at some sessions at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement just this week. And I can't tell you how many times leadership came up as a core and a critical factor that people were seeing in their organizations and the ability to drive great outcomes and experience. And this one really is around the work of an organization I saw. This individual in particular was fascinating. He, from a leadership standpoint, wanted to model the fact that we were going to have elevator etiquette, the fact that we talk to people in our elevators, that when we're in these elevators, people have the opportunity to be educated by us. So he said, we want people to say, hi, how are you? So rather than just put out a memo or put people through training, he came in early one day, the CEO, and put his desk in the elevator. And he sat and rode this elevator up and down for about 5 hours that day. And when the doors opened every time, he said, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything else that we can do for you today? So modeling leadership, the ability to kind of show is critical. It's more than just declaring, but it's doing is so important. It's so important. So as we look at the next slide, there's some key things that we can do around leadership as well. And those are around getting clear on your vision and purpose, around understanding how you model these ideas. So you have to reinforce the power of communication. That leadership becomes key in the way that not only are we responsible in the key power of choice, but that we help others be responsible as well. The third level that I'd like to share strategy is around engagement and how we must be engaged at all levels across all touch points in healthcare to drive the best in outcomes. And this story actually is a fascinating one. Told to me by a couple of nurses. There was a gentleman who was having chest pains. He was playing cards with his buddy. He's about a 75-year-old man. He drove himself to the emergency department. He walked in. They said, oh, we probably need to check you out. They determined they needed to actually admit him for a night. He stayed for 2 nights. They were able to get him regulated, and it was time for him to leave. Well, he didn't have any family there. He sort of befriended this nurse, and they were calling the transportation team to take him back out of the hospital. And the nurse said, no, 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 I'll take him out. So the nurse actually pushed him out to the parking garage. Now, he had parked there 2 days ago. And so she asked him where he parked, and they start winding their way up the parking garage. He says, I think it's the 2nd floor. She pushes him up there, and they get there. He looks around for his car, and he says, I don't see Betty anywhere. She says, Betty, that's the name of my car. And he says, I darn if these floors of the parking garage all don't look the same. So she pushes him another level. He's not there, another level. Well, they finally find Betty, and there she is, a big blue Buick, as he described her, and it's hemmed in the space. You can't get into the car on the driver's side. So she says, hold on a second, please. She actually asks him for his keys, puts him in a safe place, runs over the car, slides across Betty's bench seat, yes, and pulls the car out, pulls up next to this gentleman, helps him in the car, says, we're glad you're okay. Thanks so much for spending this time, for taking your time with us, and please let us know if there's anything else we can do, and sends him on his way. Now, I'm sure that guy has a lot of stories about the nurse that helped him drive around the parking lot looking for his car, and she was off the unit for about 20 minutes. Now, something that in a lot of places I've seen nurses get in trouble for, she was celebrated. She was lauded. We gave that individual an opportunity to do something, to engage with patients and families in a way that left them with an experience they won't forget. So when we think about engagement, what does that look like? It first and foremost is about ensuring we have the right people on board, that we have to ensure that people have a sense of ownership, that we have to be willing to share information with transparency, and ultimately reward and recognize consistently. And engagement and having the ability for people to have ownership in the experience equation is why this is at the heart of these 5 strategies. That's where the power of choice truly emerges. And it then does lead us to the foundation of which I believe this is built on, which is that of culture. When we think about culture of an organization, it becomes critical because it's through the people and the culture of an organization that we deliver what we try to accomplish each and every day in healthcare. So there's a story I was told about a gentleman. He was actually delivering a light bulb. He was called to deliver a light bulb to a room around his hospital. And the story is something to this effect. There was a woman that was in the lobby. Her husband was in surgery. And as a lot of us know, when a loved one is in surgery, you're waiting, you're either watching the screen or a pager or listening for a name to be called, and she sees the doctor and the nurse come out. And they walk up to her, and she's incredibly nervous, and she hears the doctor and nurse say, your husband's doing great. He's going to be in recovery here in a few moments, and we'll be able to move him into recovery. We'll be able to, you'll be able to see him soon. And that sense of overwhelming feeling, relief hit her, and finally she realized she was hungry. And she knew there was a machine right around the corner for her where she could grab a blueberry muffin. Well, she went over there to grab this blueberry muffin, and they were out. So she said, I'll get a cheese Danish. She goes to buy the cheese Danish. She puts her dollar bill in the machine, and what do you think it happens? It eats the dollar bill. So now she's sitting against the vending machine in the lobby of this surgery center, and she has tears rolling down her face. That's when the man with the light bulb comes in. We'll call him Joe. And he's just walking to change a light bulb in a room, and he sees this woman. Now, I know a lot of Joes that probably would have walked by, kind of looked aside and kept going to do his job. Joe stopped and asked, what was the matter? And, of course, it unleashed the whole story. This happened, that happened. Long and short of it is, finally, my husband's okay. I'm hungry. I wanted a blueberry muffin. I got to try to get a Danish to machine my money. He said, man, hold on a second. He steps away, gets on his radio. He remembers there's a machine in the back of the house. He calls his buddy. And like they said, just a few seconds later, this is the way these guys told to me, Tony comes trouncing around the corner with a theme of Chariots of Fire blaring almost like, and Tony shows up next to this woman. There's Joe with the light bulb. She's now drying the tears on her face, and he says, ma'am, we're so happy to hear that your husband's doing okay. We knew you were hungry, so here's the blueberry muffin that you wanted. And for your trouble, here's your $1 back. Tony went back to the back of the house, continued working he was. Joe went off to change his light bulb. This woman sat down and had a blueberry muffin and then was able to go to your husband. But see, that culture, that organization enabled all of those people to make that happen. And they made that in the moment. The power of choice enabled that kind of experience to take place and supported the ability for that experience, in that case, for a family member to really impact the broader patient experience overall. So we have to realize that our culture that we put in place becomes so fundamental as well. And then we have to think about the things that we need to do. And I think it ties it all together. Leadership, the ability to be agile in the moment, to focus on collaboration, to reinvigorate accountability, that we understand that all interactions that we have are grounded in our culture, that they are ultimately the keeper of choice. Which leads me to the fifth framework, the fifth strategy, which is that of movement. Now, movement is an interesting construct because I believe that experience never ends. And in fact, Dr. David Feinberg is a good friend of the Institute. When we were visiting UCLA and the work across their system, said to me, Jason, when you can show me the patient that comes next who deserves any less than the person we just took care of, that's when we can stop. So it's no wonder in healthcare that folks are so exhausted a lot of the time because we are in a constant phase of working to take care of the next person, to take care of the next person. But there is no patient experience initiative that I've ever found that's effective, because initiatives have beginning, middles, and therefore ends. This is not something that ends. This is something that is a constant ebb and flow of work. And I think is why I believe it's so critical and so fundamental to, I think, the nature of the values that I've seen come out of integrative care. Because the reality is that as we think about integrative health and we think about the work that's done to kind of drive that, it is the integration of those parts that becomes so fundamental about those relationships, about the ongoing ability to provide the best overall for people and individuals in our care. So I want to speak with you briefly as we wrap up today and share a framework for action around how we move things forward. And the first place I want to go is around the construct called the patient experience centrality of needs. So the centrality of needs is truly based on a few concepts, and I think the slide left up on me here, Jennifer, sorry. And really, as we looked at the idea of care overall, what plays out for me is this, that there are three core elements, that of quality, that of safety, and that of service. And as we think about those three things, and I want to get to that slide for you, as we think about those three things, so often we delineate those in care. But the fact is that patients and families only have one experience. And so as we think about the experience that they have, we have to realize where they're grounded. And on this centrality of needs, we begin to think about those levels. But if people that we work with, the patients, families, and communities we serve are at the center, then first and foremost, it is about the personal interactions that we have. only then do operational processes have a foundation on which to stand. And only then can our superior services, the things that we add outside of that, have any sort of impact. And so to me, the personal power of integrative health really stands at that core of personal interactions and why I believe it's so central to patient experience overall. And then experience fundamentally gets to this aspect of what I call the 3 Ps of patient experience performance. The fact that we have to be cognizant of how our people play a role, that the right people, that leadership, that the culture, agile cultures help us drive the best outcome. That if we think then about processes, it's only then that we can put the right processes in place, and that we think about improvement and ongoing improvement over time. And then that leads us to the ability to look at place. The physical and built environment, the focus and factors that relate to that. And it's really the integration of these things that have the biggest impact on people. If and only if I believe we have it centered on that purpose. What is that shared definition? What is that core that we're trying to achieve? What is it that we expect people to do each and every day? What are those choices that we're having people consider as they try to drive the best in patient experience overall? So when I think about the role of integrative health in making these models come to life, I believe it comes back to the core values that we talked about from the beginning. That I think what healthcare can learn from those that participate in integrative health disciplines is that there is power and possibility with a focus on creating health. That we have a huge, huge opportunity to expand the conversation across the continuum. That we have to think about this person-out approach. So beyond just the patient-centeredness, to me, which is a focusing on the patient in the middle, we have to begin to think about that partnership and about the perspective of those patients and family members in every choice that we make. That we focus on the macro and strategic concepts of experience overall. And it does come back down, I think, to the true nature of integrative health overall. That the importance of relationships, the focus on the whole person, that it's informed by evidence, that it's about all approaches, disciplines, but it's ultimately there to achieve optimal health and healing. See, I haven't found a place yet that hasn't been effective and outperforming around patient experience that hasn't led to great and powerful healing. It hasn't acknowledged the power of the person in the health equation. And so when we make this a priority in organizations, we're moving beyond the typical tactics, I believe, of healthcare to truly the constructs that have been so central to integrative health overall. So it leads me back to the definition. You know, if we think about the themes of, sorry, for some reason we're jumping ahead. If we think about the themes of interactions, culture, and I don't know why we jumped ahead, a bunch of slides here all of a sudden. If we think about the themes of interactions, culture, perceptions, and continuum, and then we engage on the constructs of integrated nature of health, partnership and engagement, and person-centeredness, we have huge, huge opportunity. And so while we get lined back up, I want to share a story with you, one more story I like to call from the front. And then this story really was told to me by a patient. She said, you know, I was in my room, and you know, I was at fall risk in my room, and I was going to get a glass of water, and I went to reach for my cup, and the water fell down on the floor. And I called my nurse. I was at fall risk. I didn't want them to worry about me, so I ultimately pressed my call light, and I pressed my call light, and I pressed my call light. And eventually the nurse popped in the room and said, I hope everything's okay. And she pointed out there's a spill on the floor, and she said, yes, we just need to, I just want you to know there's a spill on the floor. And the nurse went to the phone on the wall. Who can she call? She called the housekeeper. And of course, now down the hall, you hear the squeaky cart, and the housekeeper shows up to the door. She looks at the spill on the floor. She looks at the nurse. She looks at the spill on the floor, and she kind of does the little finger wave and calls the nurse over. And as this person described it to me, the world's largest whisper fight broke out. And they're whispering, fighting in front of the patient. Is this still big enough for you, housekeeper? No, you should be cleaning this up, nurse. And as this whisper fight goes on, all of a sudden they just hear this, and they both stop dead in their tracks, and they turn and see the patient looking at them both squarely in the eye with a pitcher of water from her table upside down, water all over the floor. And she looks at them both and says, is it big enough for you now? And I think that is the fundamental decision that we have in healthcare today. It has to be big enough for us now. The experience of patients and families in providing the best outcome for them in that framework has to be big enough for us now each and every day. it ultimately is about overcoming the construct of the performance paradox, that we have to begin to think about those things that, while simple, clear, and understandable, aren't always easy, trouble-free, and painless. And we have to make the choice each and every day to work on them. So yes, this is fundamentally about the power of choice. There are no secrets, as we said early on, and there are no special tactics that I don't think any of us sitting in a circle today could write on a chart that we knew what would be good in terms of providing the best experience and outcomes for our patients and families. And I do believe they ultimately lead us back to the values that we talked about at the beginning from integrative health. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that while we're free to choose, we're not free from the consequences of our choices. That we're always making choices every moment of every day in our interactions with patients and families. And ultimately, we're always providing an experience, whether an intentional experience or not. So why not do the best in that each and every day as well? So I leave you with a challenge and some questions. As you begin to think about how you can impact the patient experience, as you can impact the organizations in which you work, the relationships, organizations with which you have, what choices will you make? What choices will you help your organization make? But also, how will you honor the choices for those, who we care for and serve? Because their choices, obviously, are most fundamental in the center of this conversation. And I also say, too, that this is, at the moment of choice, really is the fact that each and every one of us can make and does make a difference. And it is that ripple effect of care that ultimately has the most significant impact on all of us. Because, as I say, we all are the patient experience, every person involved. And I think what you heard from the stories was that it doesn't make a difference if you're a bedside caregiver, you're a primary caregiver, you provide care through one of the various disciplines of integrative health, you're a receptionist at the front desk of a physician practice. We are all the patient experience. Because that woman that day I told you about, that woman who happened to be Roberta, I'll never forget her name, in that emergency department that day, who put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Everything will be okay, my boy, just breathe." And I breathed with her, and I breathed with her, and I breathed with her, gave me a beautiful gift. And these are the kind of gifts we give people each and every day. She gave me my son. She gave me an ability to be a strong family supporter in that healthcare experience. And those little things that we do for our patients and families each and every day, we give gifts that we might not never know about, but we have huge opportunities to do in every encounter, in every moment, if we're willing to make those right choices. So I thank you for the time. I know this is a lot to discuss and some incredible concepts to continue to address. But more importantly, I just want to honor the work that you all do as a critical part of the healthcare continuum and the incredible impact that you have on the patient experience, but also for the core ideas and values that are central to this, about relationships, about the whole person, because that is the center of the patient experience, and therefore why I believe we all are the patient experience each and every day. So I thank you. I know I wanted to leave it. I know we're kind of long here, Jennifer, but definitely if there's time for a few questions before we wrap up for the day, just appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Jason, for that dynamic, energetic, and engaging talk and presentation, and for rounding out our understanding of the patient experience. I know Deb is with us, and I'm wondering, Deb, if you have any questions from our audience that you can share with Jason.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Yes, I do have one question, and I think it's, I have a couple questions, but this one is, I think it's at the heart of what we're talking about. Our listener said that you mentioned that integrative health and medicine fields have values and practices that may have something to teach regular medicine. How can these assets be used to open minds, doors, and budgets?
I love that question. For me, there's great power in conversation, and I think it's the ability to draw the linkage between those. And I'll have to own that until I really started having conversations in preparation for this, I didn't realize how closely linked those core values were. I think there's huge lessons to be transferred in terms of saying, if we believe these things are true in terms of some of the arguments that I made around why experience should be the central component, the central choice that we make in healthcare today, then really the lessons become clear. Here's what we've been thinking about in integrative health for a long time and why these things are important. And as a basis of that, then, here's where we can help you understand how we build the right relationships, how we begin to think about these key constructs in a way that can ultimately impact the experience of people across the continuum. So I think that to me, the educational capacity becomes very apparent. And it is a bit about raising the awareness. Like I said, I have to own that coming out of a hospital background myself, that not being as exposed to some of the thinking as I probably should have been, it was an aha moment for me. And I think we have to create those aha moments for many people to help them realize that these core values are central. And part of it's just the introduction. It's not so much what the practices are, what the disciplines are, which I think is where people get caught up in, and it is coming back to the values, where there's incredible linkage and powerful strength in terms of the impact that those have on the outcomes that we're trying to drive. And that's where the transferability, to make up a word, of these ideas and concepts are, that we can link them back to how we deliver care at any touch point across the continuum. And therefore, I think those of you that are strong leaders and thinkers in the integrative health space can truly help educate those that are still learning how to do this elsewhere in the healthcare continuum.
Thanks, Jason. We do have a few more minutes, and since we started a little late, I'd like to take another question or two, Deb, if we have them.
A couple other questions kind of focus on the same, kind of the same theme, maybe put a different way, and that in a practical manner, the stories, the heartwarming stories, but other than conceptually, what in a practical manner does this apply to integrative practice? Those who hold the keys to the car, so to speak, are not interested in including most of our types of services, regardless of how well they align with the triple aim.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is probably a bit, I won't deny it's probably a bit of an uphill battle. I think because it is to that previous question, how do we help people understand the core values versus look at the practice for practice sake? I think it is sort of, we have to turn the model inside out. And I think if we can, I would believe, I would hope, and I'd love if there are cases to this effect, that as we begin to have an experienced mindset in organizations, the value of the full spectrum of resources and access to the right disciplines are key to being fully effective at doing that. So I think if we can begin to turn those models inside out, then we have that sort of opportunity. So the practicality of it is, I think that those leaders that understand the value of providing the whole experience for patients and families would see and should see the value in these components of care. But I will share with you too that this I mean, hopefully you can hear the passion in my voice around this. And I came out of an organizational life where I was fighting this battle each and every day just to make this conversation central to healthcare. So we're still fighting the dynamics of a system, like I said, that's in that critical balancing point. That volume still, in some ways, trumps value, even though we believe value to be central to what we're trying to accomplish. And until we can tilt the scales more to the value perspective, we're going to have to continue to remind people. And we're going to have to continue to expand the conversation. So from the practical standpoint, you got to be present, and you have to be in the conversation, and in some ways not wait to be invited. But really help people understand how the core concepts of what you're trying to accomplish do exactly what we're talking about. Create health, build the best in relationships, provide the best in experience, lead the best in outcomes, accomplish great things in terms of reducing costs and increasing quality. And you have to speak in that language, not just a construct of what the discipline might add. I think when we can get beyond the disciplines, which I think we all wouldn't argue sometimes are things we have to educate people on, the impact of the specific disciplines, I think the macro impact of what the integrative health field can bring to the overall outcome for experience. And really, as we look at the broad construct of the triple aim, it's huge. But it's going to be, I think, an ongoing dialogue and one where we have to kind of keep poking each and every day. I wish it were a simpler answer than that, but I can tell you I've experienced the same thing in just the last 5 to 7 years in trying to raise the patient experience dialogue to that level. And we're still doing that each and every day, too.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. I think we are out of time for today. I want to thank you all for your patience with our technological glitches today. And of your registration, we'll be sending out a copy of the slide deck as well as a recorded webinar for your colleagues in case they could not make it today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much again, and thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome, Jason. Thanks.